"It was just an accident, Mom," my daughter insisted as I stood trembling in the kitchen, my skin still burning from where the boiling water had splashed across my arm and chest. "Jason is going through a difficult phase. You know teenagers, they don't think before they act." That night, while they slept, I packed a small suitcase, took the handcrafted violin that had been in our family for generations, and left a note explaining that both the instrument and I would be finding a new home. 6 months later, I watched from across the concert hall as my grandson, now sobered by consequences he never expected to face, performed his conservatory audition on a rented violin, his tearful eyes meeting mine as he finally understood the true value of what had been lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was born Margaret Elena Sokolova in 1953 in the close-knit immigrant community of Westfield, New Jersey. My parents had fled Czechoslovakia during the political turmoil of the late 1940s, with little more than the clothes on their backs and a singular family treasure: a handcrafted Stradivarius-style violin made by my great-grandfather, Karl Sokol, a master luthier whose instruments were prized throughout Eastern Europe before the war. Our modest three-bedroom home on Maple Street wasn't filled with luxuries, but music transformed our simple living room into a palace of sound. Each evening, my father, Anton, worked at the local furniture factory by day, but his soul lived in the music he created after dinner. As his fingers danced across the violin strings, the struggles of immigrant life momentarily lifted from his shoulders. "Music doesn't just express emotion, Maggie," he would tell me as I watched him play, entranced by the rich tones emanating from the instrument. "It creates a bridge between hearts that words can never build. When I play our family violin, I can hear my father's voice and his father's before him. This is how we carry our legacy forward." By age 6, I was taking my first tentative lessons on the precious instrument, my small fingers struggling to find the proper positions on the fingerboard. That seemed impossibly vast to my child-sized hands. My father's patience never wavered as he guided me through scales and simple melodies, his calloused worker's hands gently adjusting my bow hold or demonstrating proper wrist technique. "Remember, Maggie, this violin isn't just wooden strings," he would remind me. "It carries the soul of our family. When you play it, you speak with the voice of generations." These weren't empty words, but living truth that shaped my understanding of both music and family heritage. The violin wasn't merely an object of value, but a physical embodiment of our identity and continuity across time and borders. Each scratch on its burnished surface told a story. The nick near the scroll from when my grandfather had fled Russian soldiers, the slight repair on the lower bout from when it had fallen during my father's journey to America. My childhood unfolded in the dual worlds of assimilation and preservation. At school, I worked to perfect my English, joined the Girl Scouts, and embraced American holidays and customs. At home, we maintained Czech traditions, language, and most importantly, the musical heritage that distinguished our family history. The violin stood as bridge between these worlds, respected in our new country for its exceptional craftsmanship and sound, while connecting us to everything we had left behind. By 16, I had developed into a serious musician, studying with a respected teacher from the New York Philharmonic, who recognized both my talent and the exceptional quality of our family instrument. "This violin deserves to be on concert stages," Mr. Abramowitz declared after my first lesson with him. And so do you, if you're willing to devote yourself to the discipline required. With my parents' support, I embraced rigorous practice schedules alongside my academic studies, eventually earning acceptance to the prestigious Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. The separation from my family was difficult, but the violin traveled with me, a constant companion carrying the physical and spiritual presence of my heritage. It was during my second year at Curtis that I met David Richardson, a brilliant cellist whose technical precision was matched by his emotional depth in performance. Our relationship developed through chamber music collaborations, long discussions about interpretative approaches, and gradually, a personal connection that transcended our musical partnership. David came from a prominent Boston family with deep roots in American cultural institutions. His father served on the board of the Boston Symphony, his mother chaired major charity events, and generations of Richardsons had attended Harvard and governed corporations. Where my family history was defined by displacement and preservation of cultural heritage against external forces, his was characterized by stability, establishment connections, and the comfortable certainty that came with generational wealth and position. These differences seemed complementary rather than divisive during our courtship. I brought passionate intensity and old-world musicality to our relationship. He contributed structural understanding of how American cultural institutions functioned and how to navigate classical music's professional landscape. We married in 1978, shortly after graduation, with the family violin providing music for our ceremony. My father playing the processional before handing the instrument to me for a special performance during the reception. Our early married years brought both professional development and personal adjustments. We moved to Boston, where David secured a position with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, while I developed a career combining orchestral performances, teaching, and chamber music. The culture clash between my immigrant family's values and his Boston Brahmin background created occasional tension, but also rich opportunities for growth as we created our own family culture blending both traditions. Our daughter Catherine was born in 1982, a thoughtful child who showed early aptitude for language and analysis rather than musical performance. Though she took obligatory lessons on both piano and cello, her true passions emerged in debate club, student government, and eventually, pre-law studies. While I occasionally felt disappointment that the deep musical connection I had shared with my father might not continue directly through my daughter, I respected her different talents and supported her developing interests. Not everyone needs to play music to appreciate its value, David reminded me when I expressed concern about Catherine's waning interest in her cello lessons. Some people create structures that allow art to flourish. That might be her contribution. This perspective proved prescient as Catherine developed into a highly organized, achievement-oriented young woman who excelled at managing complex systems and navigating institutional structures. She approached life with strategic planning that contrasted with my more intuitive, emotionally responsive approach. Where I sought meaning through artistic expression and cultural connection, she found purpose in organizational effectiveness and measurable outcomes. After David's unexpected passing from a heart attack when Catherine was in college, our relationship shifted. I found myself leaning on her practical capabilities during the difficult period of grief and readjustment, while she seemed to develop a somewhat protective stance toward me, as if my artistic temperament required management rather than representing. Different but equally valid approach to life's challenges. Catherine married Andrew Wells, a corporate attorney, during her second year of law school. Their relationship reflected shared values around achievement, social positioning, and what they called practical life management. Andrew's analytical mind and focus on tangible results meshed seamlessly with Catherine's organizational capabilities. Together, they projected an image of perfect competence, two high-achieving professionals creating an optimized family life based on efficiency and social advancement. Their son Jason arrived in 2006, a serious child whose intensity reminded me somewhat of my own father, though channeled in entirely different directions. Where my father's passion had flowed through music, Jason's manifested in competitive achievements, academic awards, sports tournaments, and eventually, concerto competitions when he showed surprising aptitude for violin around age 10. The emergence of this musical talent created an unexpected bridge between my heritage and this new generation. When Jason showed serious interest in violin studies, I approached Catherine about introducing him to the family instrument. The so-called violin isn't just valuable financially, I explained, hoping to convey the deeper significance beyond its considerable monetary worth. It carries our family history and connects Jason to a heritage that shaped who we all are. Catherine's response revealed the fundamental difference in how we valued the instrument. Mom, that violin is worth at least 6 figures according to the appraisal Dad had done last year. It's not appropriate for a beginner, even one as talented as Jason. We'll get him a good student instrument for now. This perspective, reducing the violin to its financial valuation rather than its cultural and spiritual significance, troubled me deeply, but didn't surprise me given Catherine's pragmatic approach to life. Nevertheless, I continued sharing stories about the instrument's history with Jason during his lessons, hoping to nurture appreciation for the family legacy beyond mere technical proficiency on his student violin. As Jason entered his teenage years, his relationship with music grew increasingly complicated. His natural talent remained evident, but his approach transformed from joyful exploration to strategic achievement. Competitions and prestigious youth orchestra placements became goals to conquer rather than opportunities for artistic growth. Music became another arena for demonstrating superiority, rather than expressing emotional truth or connecting with cultural heritage. Jason's violin teacher thinks he could be competition material, Catherine would report with the same satisfaction she expressed about his SAT scores or travel soccer team rankings. He's been selected as concertmaster for the Youth Symphony. Next season, that will look excellent on his college applications. This utilitarian approach to artistic pursuit contrasted sharply with the values my father had instilled, yet I tried to respect Catherine's parenting choices while gently offering alternative perspectives when appropriate. During Jason's lessons, with me, I emphasized the communicative and emotional aspects of music alongside technical development, hoping to balance his parents' achievement-oriented framing with deeper understanding of music's purpose. By 15, Jason had developed into a technically accomplished violinist with impressive precision and reliability in performance. What his playing lacked in emotional depth, he compensated for with meticulous preparation and consistent execution. His repertoire advanced rapidly through increasingly difficult concertos, each mastered with remarkable efficiency if not always profound musicality. It was during this period of accelerated technical development that I finally decided to introduce him to the family violin. During a weekend visit to my home, I carefully removed the instrument from its case, explaining its journey from my great-grandfather's workshop in Prague to our present moment. This isn't just a violin, Jason, I explained as his eyes widened at the sight of the beautifully aged instrument. It's the voice of our family across generations. When you play it, you're speaking with the same voice your great-great-grandfather created, that your great-grandfather carried across Europe during wartime, that your grandfather brought to America, and that I've preserved for your generation. His reaction offered a glimmer of the connection I had hoped for. Genuine wonder as he gently held the instrument, examined its craftsmanship, and finally drew the bow across its strings to produce the uniquely warm, resonant tone that distinguished Carl Sokol's work. "It sounds alive," he whispered, seemingly momentarily freed from his achievement orientation by the instrument's undeniable presence. "Like it's already singing before I even play a note." "That's the voice of our family," I explained, emotion tightening my throat as I witnessed this moment of genuine connection. "When you're ready, this violin will help your music speak truths that technical skill alone can never express." This moment of apparent breakthrough gave me hope that despite Catherine and Andrew's utilitarian approach to artistic development, Jason might eventually discover more meaningful connection to both music and family heritage. I began allowing him to practice on the family violin during his lessons with me, carefully supervising its use while nurturing his developing relationship with the instrument. Catherine and Andrew viewed this development with mixed reactions. Appreciation for the superior sound quality enhancing Jason's competitive performances, but concern about the responsibility associated with an instrument of such financial value. They insisted on comprehensive insurance coverage and strict limitations on when and where the violin could be used, repeatedly emphasizing its monetary worth rather than its cultural significance. The policy values it at $120,000, Andrew reminded Jason after a particularly successful recital using the family instrument. That's equivalent to a year of college tuition. Remember that whenever you're handling it. This framing, reducing family heritage to financial metrics, continued troubling me deeply. But the joy of seeing the violin in active use again tempered my concerns. The instrument belonged in a young musician's hands, not preserved as a museum, piece or investment asset. If Jason's relationship with it began with technical appreciation rather than emotional connection, perhaps deeper understanding would develop over time. The pivotal incident in our family story occurred during Jason's junior year of high school, as preparations intensified for conservatory auditions the following autumn. His technical development had continued impressively, and the family violin had become integral to his practice routine during weekly sessions at my home. Catherine and Andrew remained focused on strategic positioning for top music schools, viewing these institutions primarily as prestigious stepping stones rather than artistic development opportunities. Juilliard has a 6% acceptance rate, Catherine mentioned during Sunday dinner, her tone suggesting this statistical challenge made it particularly desirable target. Jason's teacher thinks he has a realistic chance if he continues his current trajectory. The Tchaikovsky concerto is strategic choice for auditions, Andrew added. Technically impressive without being overplayed like the Mendelssohn, it demonstrates ambition and capability. Their approach to audition preparation, focused on statistical advantages and strategic repertoire selection rather than artistic communication, reflected the fundamental differences in how we understood music's purpose. Nevertheless, I supported Jason's development with additional coaching sessions focused on the emotional architecture of the Tchaikovsky while respecting his parents' emphasis on technical precision. The situation came to explosive culmination during an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in April. Jason had arrived for his regular coaching session in uncharacteristically agitated state, his usual composed demeanor disrupted by apparent frustration with a difficult passage in the concerto's final movement. As I prepared tea in the kitchen before our session, he paced the living room, playing through the troublesome section repeatedly with increasing aggression. "Let's take a break before we start," I suggested, concerned by his unusual tension. "The passage will make more sense when you're calmer." "I don't need calm," he snapped, continuing to attack the notes with forced intensity. "I need to get this perfect. The pre-screening recording is due next week." His response, prioritizing perfection over musical understanding, reflected the achievement pressure I had observed building for months. Rather than arguing, I turned to finish preparing our tea, hoping the familiar routine might help restore balance before addressing the technical challenges. What happened next unfolded with shocking rapidity. As I poured boiling water into the teapot, Jason's frustrated attempt at the passage culminated in string breakage, the E string snapping with sharp retort that startled us both. His reaction was instantaneous and disproportionate, throwing the precious instrument onto the sofa and knocking the teapot from my hands with a violent sweep of his arm. The boiling water splashed across my forearm and chest, the sudden pain, drawing an involuntary cry as I stumbled back against the counter. Jason stood frozen, his expression shifting from rage to shock as the situation's reality registered. The family violin lay on the sofa, momentarily forgotten as angry red welts formed on my exposed skin. "Grandma, I didn't mean," he stammered. The composed achiever suddenly transformed into confused teenager confronting consequences of momentary loss of control. The next hours passed in blur of practical responses. Cold water applied to burning skin. Catherine and Andrew summoned to emergency room, where second-degree burns were diagnosed and treated. Concerned medical professionals asking careful questions about the accident that had occurred. Throughout these procedures, I observed troubling pattern emerging in how my injury was contextualized by my daughter and son-in-law. What began as Jason's stammered explanation, I got frustrated and knocked over the teapot, gradually transformed through their intervention into different narrative entirely. Mom has always been somewhat careless in the kitchen, Catherine explained to the attending physician, her tone suggesting this represented ongoing pattern rather than isolated incident. Jason was practicing nearby when she spilled the tea. These things happen at her age. This revision, shifting responsibility from Jason's clear action to supposed age-related incompetence on my part, continued developing as we returned to my home later that evening. Andrew had called ahead to have cleanup service address the spilled tea, while Catherine helped me change into comfortable clothes that wouldn't irritate the bandaged burns. We need to discuss what happened realistically, Catherine began once. We were seated in the living room, her lawyer's voice emerging as she presented what sounded like prepared statement. Jason is under tremendous pressure with auditions approaching. His reaction, while unfortunate, was momentary frustration that anyone might experience during intensive preparation. He deliberately knocked the teapot from my hands, I responded, still processing both physical pain and emotional shock from the incident. That goes beyond momentary frustration. That's not exactly what happened, Andrew interjected, his tone suggesting reasonable correction rather than outright denial. From Jason's perspective, he made a sudden movement during a moment of musical frustration, and the teapot was accidentally impacted. The conversation continued along this disturbing trajectory, subtle reframing that minimized Jason's responsibility while suggesting my perception or memory might be compromised by age or emotion. The family violin, which had precipitated the confrontation through its broken string, sat forgotten on the sofa until Catherine eventually noticed and returned it to its case without examining it for damage. The important thing now is moving forward constructively, she concluded after extended discussion that felt more like carefully managed damage control than genuine conversation. Jason feels terrible about the accident, but we can't let this derail his audition preparation. Perhaps it might be better to suspend lessons until after the recording submission next week. As they prepared to leave, Jason finally spoke directly to me for the first time since the incident. His composure mostly restored, though uncharacteristic emotional cracks remained visible beneath the surface. "I'm sorry about what happened, Grandma," he offered, the words seemingly sincere though carefully imprecise about what happened entailed. "Things have been really intense with auditions coming up. I hope you feel better soon." Catherine added what was clearly intended as reassuring afterthought. "Jason can resume practicing with the family violin once things settle down. We'll have the string replaced by the luthier who handles the BSO instruments." This casual reference to the instrument, treating it as merely valuable equipment temporarily unavailable rather than family heritage that had been disrespected, crystallized the fundamental disconnect I had been feeling throughout the entire interaction. The violin, like myself, had been reduced to useful resource in service of Jason's achievements, rather than respected as bearer of family legacy and wisdom. After they departed, I sat alone in my living room, physical pain from burns compounded by deeper emotional wound. The family that had gathered around me represented 4 generations of connection to the violin and all it symbolized, yet the instrument's true significance had been lost in translation. What my father had preserved through wartime devastation and immigrant hardship had been reduced to luxury accessory in my grandson's competitive portfolio. That night, as the burning pain in my arm made sleep impossible, I made the most important decision of my later years. The clarity that sometimes emerges from physical suffering cut through months of mounting concerns about the disconnect between my family's values and mine. With careful deliberation, despite my pain-restricted movement, I packed a small suitcase with essential clothing and personal items, I retrieved family photographs, important documents, and medications. Finally, with reverence that transcended my physical discomfort, I secured the family violin in its case, confirming it had suffered no significant damage during Jason's outburst. The note I left on the kitchen table expressed neither anger nor accusation, but a clear-eyed assessment of what had transpired and what must follow. Catherine, Andrew, and Jason. Today's incident has clarified what I've sensed for some time. Our understanding of both family responsibility and cultural heritage has diverged beyond reconciliation through ordinary conversation. The burns will heal, but the willingness to diminish harm rather than acknowledge it suggests deeper fracture requiring significant distance to address. I am taking temporary residence with Sophia Adams, address below, while arranging permanent living situation. I have also taken the so-called violin, not as financial asset, but as cultural heritage requiring protection and respect. When genuine understanding of its significance beyond monetary value or competitive advantage has been demonstrated, conversation about its future might resume. This isn't rejection, but boundary necessary for both physical and spiritual well-being. Sometimes distance provides perspective that proximity cannot offer. With love, despite pain, Margaret. As dawn approached, my longtime friend Sophia arrived as arranged by phone after my family's departure, helping transport my belongings to her guest room where I would begin recovery in both physical and emotional senses. The violin case rested beside my temporary bed, not a financial asset awaiting the next performance opportunity, but a living connection to heritage that transcended current difficulties. "You're sure about this?" Sophia asked quietly as she helped me settle in. A fellow musician who understood the violin's significance beyond its monetary value, she nevertheless recognized the magnitude of what I was doing. "Catherine will be formidable," in response. "I'm certain," I replied, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at my bandaged arm. Some boundaries must be absolute to be effective. The next 48 hours passed in relative calm as I focused on physical recovery and emotional processing. Sophia's peaceful home provided sanctuary where I could reflect without immediate pressure to justify or explain my actions. My burns received proper care, pain medication eased the worst discomfort, and sleep finally came in healing waves. The calm shattered on the third day with Catherine's arrival, unannounced, uninvited, and unmistakably prepared for confrontation. Sophia met her at the door, maintaining admirable composure in the face of my daughter's barely contained fury. "I need to speak with my mother," Catherine stated, her lawyer's voice failing to disguise the emotion beneath. "This situation requires immediate resolution." "Margaret is resting," Sophia replied with quiet firmness. "Her doctor has advised minimal stress during initial recovery. I'd be happy to tell her you stopped by." "This isn't a social call," Catherine countered, briefcase in hand suggesting official rather than familial purpose. "There are legal concerns regarding property removal that must be addressed promptly." Her framing, reducing family conflict to property dispute, confirmed the rightness of my decision even as it pained me to witness. The violin had been transformed in her mind from cultural heritage to financial asset requiring legal protection. The fact that she hadn't mentioned my well-being spoke volumes about priorities I could no longer accommodate. "I'll see if she's willing to speak with you," Sophia conceded, correctly assessing that rejection would only escalate tension. She returned moments later with reluctant permission, having confirmed I felt strong enough for the inevitable confrontation. Catherine entered the guest room with controlled steps that failed to disguise her agitation. Her gaze moved rapidly between my bandaged arm, the violin case visible beside the bed, and the small collection of personal belongings that represented my decisive departure from her home. "This is unnecessary drama," she began without greeting, settling into the room's single chair with posture suggesting court proceedings rather than family discussion. "The incident was unfortunate but hardly justifies this extreme response." The incident was physical assault followed by deliberate misrepresentation, I corrected calmly, my voice steadier than I had expected. Jason's actions were concerning, but your response was more troubling. You chose to protect him from consequences rather than acknowledge harm. You're catastrophizing what was clearly an accident, she countered, her tone suggesting reasonable correction of emotional exaggeration. Jason made a sudden movement during a moment of frustration. The water spilled as a result. Converting this into intentional assault serves no constructive purpose. The conversation continued along this divergent path, two fundamentally different interpretations of what had occurred and what it represented. Catherine's perspective framed the event as minor incident magnified by my emotional reaction and age-related vulnerability. My understanding recognized it as culmination of deeper pattern where family heritage and personal boundaries had been systematically devalued in service of achievement and convenience. The violin must be returned, Catherine eventually stated, moving to what clearly represented her primary concern. Taking it without discussion was inappropriate given its significant value and Jason's upcoming auditions. The violin isn't property to be allocated based on scheduling convenience, I responded, my voice strengthening with conviction despite physical weakness. It's living heritage entrusted to those who understand its significance beyond monetary worth or competitive advantage. It's an instrument worth over $100,000 that belongs to our family, she corrected, expressions suggesting patience tested by irrational sentiment. Jason has demonstrated both appreciation for its quality and technical capability to use it appropriately. He threw it on the sofa in rage before knocking boiling water onto me, I reminded her, the memory still viscerally painful. That demonstrates neither appreciation nor capability, only disrespect for both the instrument and the person who preserved it for his generation. The impasse between us crystallized in that exchange, not disagreement about facts, but fundamental difference in values that interpreted those facts through incompatible frameworks. Catherine saw a valuable asset improperly removed. I recognized cultural heritage protected from devaluation and disrespect. After nearly an hour of circular discussion that resolved nothing, Catherine finally shifted from persuasion to open threat. If the violin isn't returned voluntarily, we'll pursue legal remedies, she stated, professional detachment failing to disguise personal frustration. I've already consulted with colleagues specializing in property recovery. The legal status of family heirlooms passed through generations without formal documentation is complex, I noted calmly, having anticipated this approach. Establishing historical ownership patterns and cultural significance beyond monetary valuation would require extensive testimony from extended family and documentary evidence. The response, revealing I had considered legal dimensions rather than acting on pure emotion, visibly surprised her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her carefully composed features. This isn't how family disagreements should be resolved, she said finally, momentarily sounding more like daughter than attorney. I agree completely, I responded gently, which is why addressing the underlying values conflict matters more than determining legal ownership of the violin. The instrument is symptom, not cause, of our disconnection. She departed without resolution, but with apparent recognition that immediate legal action might create complications rather than swift resolution. As the door closed behind her, Sophia returned with fresh tea and quiet understanding of emotional exhaustion such confrontations inevitably produce. She'll be back, Sophia observed, settling beside me. Catherine has never accepted defeat easily. It isn't about winning or losing, I corrected softly. It's about establishing boundaries that protect what matters most. The violin isn't prize but symbol of values that deserve preservation. The following weeks brought gradual physical healing alongside development of more permanent arrangements. My burns improved steadily under proper medical care, the angry, red welts gradually fading to sensitive pink patches that would eventually become subtle scars. visible reminders of boundaries violated and lessons learned. With Sophia's help, I secured small apartment near downtown Boston, close enough to cultural institutions I valued, but removed from Catherine and Andrew's suburban neighborhood. Throughout this transition, I maintained deliberate communication, discipline, responding to Catherine's increasingly formal messages with brief acknowledgments while declining repeated demands for face-to-face meetings about the violin's return. Jason's pre-screening recording for conservatory applications proceeded using rented instrument arranged by Andrew, high-quality violin that met technical requirements while lacking the distinctive voice and heritage of the family instrument. Jason's recording session went well despite the circumstances, Catherine reported in one of her regular updates that seemed designed to induce guilt about impact of my departure on his audition preparation. The rental instrument is adequate, but lacks the tonal qualities that distinguished his performances on the family violin. My response acknowledged his accomplishment while maintaining necessary boundary. I'm pleased Jason continues progressing despite challenges. Developing adaptability across different instruments builds valuable musicianship that serves long-term development. This measured tone, neither rejecting connection nor surrendering principle, characterized our limited communication during subsequent months. Catherine maintained regular, though increasingly terse, updates about Jason's musical progress, each implicitly suggesting my absence and the violin's unavailability created unnecessary hardship in his development. I responded with appropriate interest in his accomplishments, while consistently redirecting focus from instrumental technicalities to deeper aspects of musical understanding and artistic growth. 3 months after my departure, as autumn transformed, Boston's landscapes with vibrant color that reminded me of my father's descriptions of bohemian forests, unexpected development shifted our family dynamic. An email arrived from Jason himself, the first direct communication since the incident that had separated us. Dear Grandma, it began with formality that suggested careful composition rather than spontaneous outreach. I hope you are healing well from your injuries. I wanted to let you know that I've been accepted for live auditions at 3 conservatories, including Juilliard. The pre-screening recordings were successful despite challenging circumstances. The message continued with details about his preparation process and technical considerations regarding the rented instrument, topics that maintained safe distance from emotional territory while establishing connection through shared musical knowledge. Only in final paragraph did personal element emerge through carefully constructed sentences. I've been thinking about what happened during our last lesson. While I don't remember exactly how the water spilled, I acknowledge that my frustration was inappropriate regardless of circumstances. I hope we might speak in person before the live auditions in January, as your musical guidance has been valuable to my development. The message revealed careful calibration, acknowledgement without full responsibility, apology without specific admission, invitation to reconciliation focused on musical contribution rather than personal relationship or cultural heritage. Though limited, it represented first recognition from any family member that something beyond accident had occurred, warranting at least partial acknowledgement of responsibility. My response maintained similar balance, genuine recognition of his accomplishment alongside gentle holding of necessary boundary. Congratulations on your audition acceptances, Jason. Your hard work and talent deserve recognition, and I'm pleased these prestigious institutions have acknowledged your potential. I would be open to meeting before your auditions, though not yet for musical coaching. There are more fundamental understandings that need addressing before our teacher-student relationship could resume effectively. Perhaps we might meet for lunch at the Museum Cafe next week if your schedule permits. The proposed location, neutral territory associated with cultural appreciation rather than either home environment, offered appropriate setting for careful rebuilding of connection, while maintaining necessary distance from intense emotional associations of either my apartment or his family home. The violin would remain absent from this initial reconnection, its physical presence too loaded with unresolved tensions to facilitate productive conversation. Jason's acceptance of this invitation came with surprising promptness, suggesting eagerness beneath his carefully maintained composure. We arranged meeting time that accommodated his school schedule while allowing unhurried conversation in public space, where emotional escalation seemed unlikely. When we finally sat across from each other in the museum's sunlit cafe, I was struck by subtle changes in his appearance and demeanor. The 3 months since our last encounter had brought noticeable maturation, not just physical growth but palpable shift in self-awareness that manifested in how he carried himself. The polished achievement machine seemed tempered by something resembling genuine reflection, though whether this represented lasting development or temporary adjustment to unexpected consequence remained unclear. "Thank you for meeting with me. Grandma," he began, hands wrapped around tea mug and gesture suggesting both comfort-seeking and nervous energy. "I wasn't sure you would agree." "Family connections matter even when they require recalibration," I responded gently. "Distance doesn't necessarily mean disconnection, only proper boundaries while healing occurs." Our conversation unfolded with careful navigation around still sensitive territory. Jason described his preparation for upcoming auditions with technical precision that revealed continuing emphasis on achievement metrics, while occasional references to emotional interpretation suggested possible evolution in his approach. I listened attentively, offering appropriate acknowledgement of his hard work while refraining from specific coaching that might prematurely restore dynamic, not yet ready for healthy resumption. Only as we approached conclusion did conversation finally touch deeper emotional territory that lay between us. Jason set his empty cup down with deliberate care before meeting my eyes directly for perhaps first time since our meeting began. "I want to apologize properly for what happened," he said, voice lowered but steadier than I might have expected. "Not just for the accident with the water, but for how I behaved during our lessons sometimes. I've been thinking about things differently since you left." The phrasing still contained careful distancing. The accident with the water, rather than direct acknowledgement of his action. But his willingness to acknowledge broader behavioral pattern represented meaningful step beyond his parents' complete deflection of responsibility. "What specifically has changed in your thinking?" I asked gently, recognizing opportunity for greater understanding without forcing confrontation that might derail nascent reconnection. He considered the question with uncharacteristic deliberation before responding. "I think I've been treating music as another competition to win, rather than something with deeper purpose. Your stories about the family violin and how it connected generations, I didn't really understand why that mattered so much to you. I think I'm starting to see it differently now." This acknowledgement, however preliminary, of value beyond achievement, represented first genuine recognition of perspective that had remained invisible to my family despite my consistent attempts to communicate it. Not complete understanding, certainly, but opening that might eventually allow meaningful bridge between our different worlds. "That matters to me more than you might realize," I told him honestly. "The violin itself has tremendous value, but understanding what it represents matters even more. That connection to heritage and purpose beyond personal achievement is what I've been trying to preserve." As our meeting concluded with tentative plans for another conversation before his auditions, I felt cautious hope that genuine learning might emerge from painful separation. Not immediate restoration of previous arrangements, but possibility of new relationship grounded in mutual respect rather than utilitarian assessment of what each could provide the other. The most significant development in our family dynamic occurred 6 weeks later, when invitations arrived for Jason's first live audition at New England Conservatory. Catherine forwarded formal notice with brief message indicating separate tickets had been arranged for me, given current circumstances. The audition would include standard repertoire performed on the rented instrument that had replaced the family, violin in Jason's practice routine. My decision to attend represented calculated risk, supporting Jason's development while maintaining necessary boundaries that preserved both self-respect and cultural values I had chosen to protect. The conservatory's performance hall carried powerful associations from my own student days, its acoustics and atmosphere evoking memories of artistic exploration that transcended mere technical achievement. Arriving early to secure seating that balanced visibility against potential distraction my presence might create for Jason, I observed Catherine and Andrew in animated conversation with several faculty members, networking connections that might influence admission decisions regardless of performance quality. Their polished appearance and confident engagement with institutional representatives reflected approach to musical education as strategic advancement opportunity rather than artistic development pathway. When Jason appeared on stage 40 minutes later, I noticed immediate difference in his deportment from previous performances I had witnessed. Though outwardly composed as always, subtle tension in his shoulders and unusual pallor suggested emotional investment beyond technical execution, vulnerability rarely visible in his typically controlled presentations. The rented violin in his hands lacked the distinctive character and voice of the family instrument, its factory precision providing technical reliability without distinctive personality or historical resonance. His program began with Bach, standard audition requirement, demonstrating technical foundation and interpretive understanding. As he moved through the opening measures, I detected unusual hesitation in passages that should have flowed with practiced ease. Not technical limitation, but emotional uncertainty, as if suddenly questioning approach that had previously seemed unambiguous. The performance remained impressive by objective standards, but lacked the confident assertion that had characterized his earlier playing. Between selections, his gaze briefly swept audience before landing on my position near the back wall. Momentary surprise registered in widened eyes before composure returned with visible effort. The Tchaikovsky excerpt that followed, the very concerto passage that had precipitated our fateful confrontation, began with unexpected restraint, technical brilliance tempered by something resembling genuine introspection rather than calculated intensity. As music unfolded, subtle transformation became increasingly apparent, not dramatic reinvention, but gradual emergence of authentic voice beneath technical framework. Phrases that had previously been executed with mechanical precision now breathed with tentative emotional connection. Dynamic contrasts expressed genuine feeling rather than programmed variation. Though lacking the family violin's distinctive voice, Jason's playing revealed emerging musician behind technical facade that had previously dominated his approach. When final notes faded into expectant silence, spontaneous applause acknowledged genuine accomplishment rather than merely impressive execution. Faculty evaluators nodded with apparent approval, while Catherine and Andrew exchanged satisfied glances that suggested successful achievement of strategic objective. Yet something in Jason's expression as he acknowledged audience response suggested understanding beyond competitive success, glimmer of recognition that music might offer more profound satisfaction than merely advancing hierarchical positioning. As audition concluded and attendees gathered in reception area for obligatory networking and feedback collection, I remained deliberately distant, acknowledging Jason's accomplishment with brief smile and nod when our gazes briefly met across crowded space. This measured response, neither effusive celebration nor cold rejection, maintained necessary boundary while confirming continued connection despite unresolved tensions. Catherine approached with careful neutrality that barely concealed underlying tension. The faculty seemed impressed, she observed, professional assessment replacing maternal pride in characteristic fashion, though several mentioned the instrument seemed somewhat limiting for his technical capability. The musician creates the music, not merely the instrument, I responded gently. Jason showed genuine musicality today beyond technical execution. That matters more than any specific violin's voice. This perspective, prioritizing artistic development over competitive advantage, clearly remained foreign to her understanding, despite months of separation and reflection. Her expression suggested familiar frustration with values framework she considered impractically sentimental, compared to strategic positioning and measurable achievement. The family violin would have made difference in this audition, she stated with certainty that brooked no contradiction. Its superior tonal qualities would have distinguished his performance more definitively from other applicants. Perhaps, I acknowledged without conceding the underlying premise. But developing genuine musical voice that transcends specific instrument creates more sustainable artistic foundation. Jason showed promising growth in that direction today. Our conversation might have continued along this divergent path had Jason himself not approached, still carrying the rented violin, and wearing expression that suggested important realization rather than merely satisfaction with successful performance. "You came," he addressed me directly, genuine surprise evident beneath controlled exterior. "I wasn't sure you would." "Your development matters to me," I confirmed simply, "both musical and personal." Something in this acknowledgement, recognition, of both his accomplishment and his personhood beyond achievement, seemed to reach him in way previous conversations had not. For a brief moment, the carefully constructed facade of confident achiever gave way to glimpse of young person genuinely seeking understanding beyond competitive success. "Could we talk?" he asked with uncharacteristic directness. "Not about the audition or conservatory applications, about the violin and other things." Catherine's expression registered immediate concern at this unexpected development, potential disruption to carefully managed narrative that had characterized family's approach to our separation. "We should celebrate your successful audition," she interjected smoothly. "Faculty members are waiting to speak with you about your performance." "I'll meet with them afterward," Jason responded with surprising firmness. "This conversation matters more right now." This assertion of priority, placing personal understanding above strategic advancement, represented significant shift from previous patterns where competitive positioning had consistently outranked emotional or cultural considerations. Catherine's momentary speechlessness suggested recognition of change beyond her immediate control or understanding. "We could walk through the sculpture garden," I suggested, offering neutral territory that provided both privacy and appropriate boundaries for conversation still requiring careful navigation. "It's quiet this time of afternoon." Jason nodded. Agreement while Catherine struggled visibly with competing impulses. Desire to maintain control over unfolding situation versus recognition that direct intervention might escalate tensions counterproductively. "We'll be waiting in the reception area when you're finished," she finally stated, concession wrapped in reminder of continued oversight and expectation. As we walked slowly through conservatory's adjoining sculpture garden, winter sunlight casting long shadows across snow-dusted installations, Jason maintained uncharacteristic silence, gathering thoughts rather than presenting prepared position, as had been his habit in previous interactions. I allowed this process without pressure, recognizing importance of self-directed realization over externally imposed understanding. "I've been thinking about what the violin really means," he finally offered, as we paused beside abstract bronze piece suggesting musical forms in frozen motion. "Not just what it's worth or how it sounds, but what Dad called its provenance, its history and meaning beyond the object itself." This framing, recognition of value beyond material assessment, suggested genuine evolution in perspective that had previously reduced cultural heritage to financial asset or competitive advantage. Not complete understanding, certainly, but opening toward appreciation previously absent from his utilitarian approach. "I realized something during the audition today," Jason continued, his gaze fixed on the bronze sculpture, as if finding it easier to speak without direct eye contact. "When I was playing the Tchaikovsky, the same passage where the string broke that day, I kept hearing the family violin in my head. Not just its sound, but all the stories you told me about it. Great-great-grandfather Carol making it during political turmoil, grandfather Anton bringing it to America, You learning on it as a child? He paused, collecting thoughts that seemed to surprise even him in their emergence. The rental violin is technically perfect, balanced, responsive, consistent. But it has no voice of its own, no history. It's just a tool. I never understood what you meant about the family violin having a soul until I had to play without it. This insight, emerging not from my explanations but his own experience, represented the kind of understanding that couldn't be imposed or instructed. The absence of the family violin had created space for recognition that might never have developed through continued access without appreciation. The instrument carries generations of stories, I acknowledged gently. But those stories only matter when they're understood and respected. The violin itself is just wood and strings without that understanding. Jason nodded slowly, genuine. Comprehension replacing the performative listening I'd often observed in our previous interactions. I didn't respect it that day, he admitted, the most direct acknowledgement of responsibility he had offered since the incident. I was frustrated with myself for not mastering the passage immediately, and I took it out on the violin. And on you. The admission hung between us. Not complete, perhaps, but substantive step beyond the careful distancing and minimization that had characterized previous references to the incident. His choice of words, took it out on, acknowledged agency, and responsibility previously absent from family narrative about accident and circumstances. What happened that day wasn't just about the water or even the violin, I responded carefully. It was about something more fundamental, how we value things and people beyond their usefulness to immediate goals. The violin became symbol of that deeper disconnect. Mom and Dad still don't understand, he observed with surprising insight. They think this is just about property rights and sentimental attachment. They keep talking about the violin's insurance valuation and replacement, cost like that's what matters most to you. This perception, recognition of the fundamental values misalignment I had struggled to articulate, suggested deeper understanding than I had dared hope for in our initial reconnection. Not merely acknowledging the specific incident, but perceiving the underlying pattern it represented within our family dynamic. Different generations often value different things, I offered, careful not to drive wedge between Jason and his parents despite their continued minimization of what had occurred. Your parents want security and achievement for you, worthy goals that shape how they see the world. My generation tends to value continuity and meaning that transcends individual accomplishment. But you think they're wrong about the violin? He pressed, adolescent tendency toward binary judgment, momentarily overriding the nuance developing in his perspective. Not wrong so much as incomplete, I corrected gently. They understand its financial value and competitive advantage perfectly well. What's missing is appreciation for its significance beyond those metrics, the story it carries, the connections it represents, the legacy it embodies. We continued walking through the sculpture garden, winter sunlight casting long shadows across installations that transformed abstract shapes into momentarily profound statements. The conversation unfolded with surprising depth for someone Jason's age. Questions about how value is determined beyond market assessment, how objects acquire meaning beyond function, how legacy transmits across generations informs both tangible and intangible. Would you consider bringing the violin to my Juilliard audition? He asked eventually, the request reflecting both practical desire for superior instrument and newfound appreciation for its significance. Not permanently, but just for that performance? It would mean something different now. The question represented test of boundaries I had established, not merely practical arrangement but assessment of whether enough understanding had developed to warrant revisiting original decision. While Jason's perspective showed promising evolution, Catherine and Andrew remained entrenched in narrative that minimized both the incident and the values conflict it had revealed. That's not a simple question, I responded honestly. The violin's absence has created space for important realizations that might not have emerged otherwise. Sometimes keeping something at distance allows its true value to become visible in ways proximity prevents. But if I really understand its significance now, he began, suggestion of previous achievement-oriented entitlement briefly resurfacing, before self-awareness intervened. Sorry, that's exactly the kind of thinking you're talking about, isn't it? Treating understanding as achievement that earns reward rather than ongoing process. This self-correction, recognition of entitlement, pattern without external prompting, suggested genuine development rather than strategic adaptation. Not complete transformation, certainly, but substantive growth beyond previous limitations. Let's not decide today, I suggested, offering middle path between rejection and premature reconciliation. There's time before the Juilliard audition for further conversation and demonstration of understanding through actions rather than intentions. Meaningful change requires consistent expression beyond momentary recognition. As we returned to the reception area where Catherine and Andrew waited with carefully managed expressions, suggesting suspended judgment, pending information about our conversation, Jason surprised me with an unexpected request. I'd like to bring Grandma to dinner next week. He announced with confidence that temporarily silenced his parents' prepared questions about our discussion. There are things we should talk about as a family before the Juilliard audition. This initiative, taking responsibility for family conversation rather than delegating resolution to parents or avoiding conflict entirely, demonstrated maturity beyond what our previous interactions had suggested. Catherine and Andrew exchanged glances conveying mixture of concern and resignation before Catherine responded with measured acceptance. Of course, she agreed with professional composure that masked whatever reservations she might have harbored. We'd be happy to have you for dinner, Mom. Perhaps Thursday evening would work with everyone's schedule? The arrangement, formal, in tone yet potentially substantive in purpose, established framework for conversation that had been postponed through months of separate narratives and parallel processing. Whether this would produce meaningful reconciliation or merely restate entrenched positions remained uncertain, but the initiative itself represented promising development. The intervening days before this family dinner brought unexpected preparation from Jason. Emails requesting specific Czech recipes my father had enjoyed, questions about family traditions that might have been lost in generational transition, interest in photographs documenting the violin's history across decades and continents. These inquiries suggested genuine engagement with cultural heritage previously reduced to competitive advantage or financial asset. Jason has been quite focused on family history suddenly, Catherine mentioned during brief phone call confirming dinner arrangements. Her tone conveyed mixture of confusion and tentative approval regarding this unexpected development. He's been asking questions about your father that he's never shown interest in before. Sometimes distance creates clarity that proximity prevents, I observed, echoing sentiment from my departure letter without directly referencing that painful communication. Absence can reveal value previously taken for granted. The dinner itself began with inevitable awkwardness of formal gathering, following extended separation and unresolved conflict. Catherine's meticulous table setting and elaborate menu suggested both genuine effort toward reconciliation and characteristic control mechanism, ensuring interaction would unfold within carefully managed parameters. Andrew's cordial but reserved greeting reflected professional habit of maintaining diplomatic engagement despite underlying tensions. Jason's nervous energy manifested in uncharacteristic attention to details normally beneath his notice, helping arrange serving dishes, ensuring water glasses remained filled, observing interactions with unusual awareness. Only after preliminary conversation about neutral topics, conservatory audition feedback, upcoming musical events, community developments, did Jason finally introduce the substantive discussion he had proposed. With deliberate formality suggesting prepared comments rather than spontaneous conversation, he addressed the central tension that had separated our family since the incident. I want to talk about what really happened the day Grandma got burned. he began, directness silencing kitchen sounds as Catherine paused in serving dessert, and Andrew set down his coffee cup with careful precision. Not the story we've been telling ourselves, but what actually occurred and what it meant. The distinction between constructed narrative and actual experience cut to heart of disconnect that had developed between my perspective and family's selective interpretation. Catherine's expression suggested immediate concern about direction this conversation might take, while Andrew assumed what I recognized as his professional negotiation posture, attentive but guarded. I lost control when the violin string broke. Jason continued with remarkable clarity. I wasn't just frustrated. I was angry that something was interfering with my perfect preparation schedule. I threw the violin on the couch and knocked the teapot out of Grandma's hands deliberately. It wasn't an accident. I was having a tantrum like a little kid, not an unfortunate incident like we've been calling it. This unvarnished acknowledgement, speaking, truth that had been carefully obscured through months of minimization and reframing, created stunning silence around the dining table. Catherine appeared momentarily speechless. Family narrative she had constructed and defended suddenly challenged by its supposed beneficiary. Andrew studied his dessert plate with unexpected fascination, professional composure temporarily inadequate, to emerging reality. Jason, you don't need to be so hard on yourself, Catherine finally responded, instinctively attempting to reinstate protective framing that had characterized family's approach. You were under tremendous pressure with audition. Deadlines. Accidents happen in stressful circumstances. It wasn't an accident, Mom, he countered with gentle firmness I had never witnessed in his interactions with his parents. Calling it that just made it impossible to actually deal with what happened. Grandma got hurt because I couldn't control myself. And then we all pretended it was something else so I wouldn't have to face consequences. The assessment, remarkably mature in both self-awareness and systemic understanding, represented perspective I had not expected from someone his age, particularly given family context that had consistently prioritized achievement over accountability. Not performance for my benefit, but genuine recognition that appeared to have developed through internal processing rather than external pressure. There's no purpose in focusing on negative framing, Andrew contributed. Professional mediation. Skills engaging to redirect conversation toward future arrangements rather than past accountability. What matters is how we move forward constructively from current circumstances. But that's exactly what we haven't been doing, Jason responded with unexpected insight. We've been trying to move forward without actually understanding what happened, or why Grandma felt she needed to leave. We keep talking about the violin like it's just expensive property she took, not something with meaning and history that I disrespected. This reframing, shifting focus from property dispute to values conflict, cut through months of parallel narratives to address fundamental disconnect that had remained largely unacknowledged in family's approach to reconciliation. Catherine and Andrew exchanged glances suggesting recognition that rehearsed positions might prove inadequate to conversation unfolding beyond anticipated parameters. The violin represents different things to different family members, Catherine offered, attempting to establish common ground while maintaining conceptual framework that prioritized practical considerations over cultural significance. We all recognize its importance, though perhaps from different perspectives. That's just it, Jason countered with growing confidence in his developing understanding. We haven't actually recognized its importance beyond its dollar value and how it helps me sound better in competitions. Grandma sees it as connection to our family's history and values. We've been treating it like fancy equipment while she's been protecting what it represents. This insight, articulating distinction that had remained largely invisible to Catherine and Andrew, despite my attempts to communicate it, came not from my explanation, but Jason's own realization through experience of the violin's absence. The understanding he expressed reflected genuine development rather than strategic positioning to regain access to valuable resource. The violin is certainly significant family heirloom, Andrew acknowledged cautiously, concession wrapped in terminology that still emphasized property dimensions over cultural meaning. Its provenance and craftsmanship represent substantial heritage beyond monetary valuation. It's more than an heirloom, Dad, Jason persisted, refusing convenient resolution that would maintain underlying misalignment while appearing to address surface conflict. It's like a physical embodiment of values and history that connects generations. When I played it knowing that great-great-grandfather Carol made it during political upheaval, that Grandpa Anton brought it to America as most precious possession, that Grandma learned on it as child, it changes what music means. It's not just about sounding good or impressing judges. This articulation, expressing connection between physical object and intangible values with remarkable clarity, suggested development of perspective previously absent from family's utilitarian approach to both the violin and musical education generally. Catherine's expression reflected mixture of surprise and reluctant pride at son's unexpected eloquence regarding matters she had consistently framed in practical rather than cultural terms. Your grandmother has certainly emphasized the instrument's historical significance, she acknowledged with careful neutrality that neither endorsed nor dismissed this perspective. Its provenance adds contextual dimension beyond technical characteristics. But we haven't really listened, Jason insisted, perception cutting through diplomatic phrasing to underlying disconnect. We kept treating the violin like it was just valuable property or competitive advantage when Grandma was trying to teach me about heritage and meaning. Then, when I disrespected both the violin and her, we acted like it was just unfortunate accident instead of failure to understand what actually mattered. Throughout this remarkable conversation, I had maintained deliberate silence, allowing Jason's independently developed insights to emerge without guidance or reinforcement that might suggest performance for my benefit rather than genuine understanding. His articulation of perspectives I had struggled to communicate represented breakthrough more powerful for having developed through his own processing rather than external instruction. What would you suggest moving forward? I finally asked. Question directed at Jason rather than his parents despite their nominal authority in family decision-making. This approach, acknowledging his emerging maturity while creating space for demonstration of understanding beyond verbal recognition, offered opportunity for meaningful action rather than mere articulation. I think I need to earn back the privilege of playing the family violin, he responded without hesitation. Framework of entitlement replaced by recognition of responsibility. Not by practicing harder or winning competitions, but by actually understanding what it represents and treating it with appropriate respect. That means learning more about our family history, understanding Czech musical traditions, and approaching music as communication rather than just technical achievement. The proposal, prioritizing cultural understanding over competitive advantage, represented fundamental shift from family's previous approach to both the violin specifically and musical education generally. Catherine appeared momentarily disconcerted by suggestion that access to instrument should be contingent on cultural appreciation rather than technical capability or audition requirements. The Juilliard audition is only 6 weeks away, she noted, with characteristic attention to practical timeline. Extended cultural exploration, while valuable educational experience, presents challenging schedule constraints given competitive preparation requirements. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got us here, Jason observed with surprising insight. Always prioritizing competitive advantage over deeper understanding. Maybe if I don't have the family violin for Juilliard, that's consequence I need to accept for not appreciating what it meant before. This willingness to accept potential competitive disadvantage as appropriate consequence for previous disrespect demonstrated remarkable maturity compared to achievement-oriented entitlement that had characterized his earlier approach. Catherine and Andrew exchanged glances conveying mixture of concern about practical implications and reluctant recognition of son's developing perspective beyond their carefully cultivated framework. Perhaps compromise approach might address both cultural appreciation and practical considerations, Andrew suggested. Professional mediation instincts seeking resolution that acknowledged emerging values while preserving existing priorities. Jason could undertake appropriate cultural exploration while maintaining necessary technical preparation, with violin access determined by demonstrated understanding rather than arbitrary timeline. Before discussion could continue along this path of negotiated arrangement, Jason surprised us all with unanticipated proposal that transformed potential compromise into meaningful commitment. "I'd like to play a different piece for my Juilliard. Audition," he announced with conviction, suggesting thorough consideration rather than impulsive suggestion. "Not the Tchaikovsky we've been preparing, but something connected to our Czech heritage. There's Dvořák violin concerto that Professor Levinson mentioned might suit my technical abilities while offering different expressive challenges. It would mean completely reworking my audition program, but it would also demonstrate commitment to understanding our musical heritage beyond just competitive positioning." This proposal, sacrificing months of preparation and strategic repertoire selection for cultural connection previously undervalued in family's approach, represented substantive rather than symbolic commitment to values I had attempted to communicate. The Tchaikovsky concerto had been selected specifically for competitive advantage in audition context. Substituting Czech repertoire despite preparation timeline constraints demonstrated willingness to prioritize cultural meaning over strategic positioning. Catherine's expression suggested immediate concern about practical implications for audition outcomes. Changing repertoire at this stage represents significant risk to application strength, she noted with characteristic focus on competitive considerations. The Tchaikovsky has been meticulously prepared for optimal technical presentation. "That's kind of the point, Mom," Jason responded with gentle persistence rather than adolescent confrontation. "I've been approaching music as technical achievement rather than cultural expression. Playing something connected to our heritage, even if it's less polished, makes statement about what actually matters in musical development." This perspective, prioritizing meaningful expression over technical perfection, challenged fundamental framework that had shaped families' approach to musical education throughout Jason's development. Andrew studied his son with thoughtful assessment, suggesting recognition of maturity beyond what their carefully managed upbringing had anticipated or perhaps intended. "The decision ultimately belongs to Jason as performing artist," he observed with surprising deference to adolescents' emerging artistic autonomy. While practical considerations merit attention, artistic integrity requires authentic expression, aligned with performers' values and intentions. This framing, acknowledging Jason's agency in artistic decisions rather than subordinating expression to strategic positioning, represented significant evolution in family approach that had consistently prioritized achievement metrics over personal meaning or cultural connection. Catherine's hesitation suggested continued concern about competitive implications, while recognizing shifting ground beneath previously unquestioned assumptions about priorities and purposes. Throughout this unexpected conversation, the violin itself remained physically absent yet powerfully present in its significance beyond material form. What had begun as property dispute had transformed into substantive exploration of values, priorities, and intergenerational transmission of meaning beyond achievement or acquisition. Not full resolution, certainly, but meaningful evolution beyond entrenched positions that had characterized initial conflict. As evening concluded with tentative plans for continued conversation rather than immediate resolution regarding the violin itself, Jason requested moment alone with me before my departure. Catherine and Andrew provided space with uncharacteristic deference to emerging relationship that seemed to transcend previous patterns of carefully managed interaction. "I've been working on something I'd like to show you," Jason explained once. We settled in living room temporarily vacated by his parents. "It's not finished yet, but it's part of trying to understand what you've been teaching me about music as connection rather than just achievement." From folder previously unnoticed among school materials, he produced several handwritten pages of musical notation, composition exercise revealing technical competence alongside emerging expressive voice previously undeveloped in his performance-focused training. The piece, titled simply Heritage, incorporated melodic elements drawn from Czech folk traditions I recognized from my father's playing alongside contemporary harmonic language reflecting Jason's classical training. "It's based on lullaby you mentioned your father used to play," he explained, unexpected vulnerability replacing characteristic confidence as he shared creative work beyond performance or competition context. "I've been researching Czech folk music traditions and trying to connect technical skills I've developed with something more meaningful. This undertaking, independent exploration of cultural heritage through creative expression rather than mere performance, represented precisely the kind of engagement with legacy I had hoped might eventually develop through his relationship with the family violin. Not performed understanding for strategic advantage, but genuine exploration of connection previously unrecognized or undervalued in family's achievement-oriented framework. This isn't about trying to get the violin back," he added quickly, surprising. Perception of potential misinterpretation, demonstrating emotional intelligence beyond previous interactions. "Even if you decide I shouldn't play it again, I want to understand this part of our family history better. It matters regardless of the instrument itself." This distinction, recognizing value in cultural connection independent of access to specific object, suggested genuine rather than strategic development of perspective I had attempted to communicate throughout his musical education. Not complete understanding, certainly, but meaningful evolution beyond utilitarian approach that had previously characterized his relationship with both music and family heritage. "May I look at it?" I asked, genuine interest rather than evaluative. Assessment guiding request to examine composition that represented new dimension in his musical development. As I reviewed notated music, technical elements, reflecting classical training alongside melodic material drawing from cultural traditions previously unexplored in his musical education, I recognized genuine attempt to bridge worlds that had remained disconnected in family's approach to his development. Not polished composition, certainly, but authentic exploration beyond parameters previously established through competition-oriented training. "There's voice emerging here beyond technical facility," I observed, genuine assessment rather than obligatory, encouragement guiding response. "The folk elements aren't simply quoted, but integrated into personal expression that honors tradition while creating something new. That's exactly what living heritage means. Not preservation of museum piece, but continued evolution through genuine understanding." Jason's expression revealed mixture of relief and satisfaction, suggesting validation beyond competitive assessment he had grown accustomed to through years of achievement-oriented evaluation. Something beyond technical competence or strategic positioning had emerged through crisis that separated us. Beginning of authentic artistic voice connecting technical facility with meaningful expression previously undeveloped in his carefully managed training. "I won't be ready to perform it for a long time," he acknowledged with realistic assessment, reflecting genuine artistic standards rather than achievement timeline. "But working on it has helped me understand what you've been trying to teach me about music beyond competitions and auditions. Even when it's technically imperfect, it can still communicate something meaningful about who we are and where we come from." This insight, recognizing expressive purpose beyond technical execution, reflected precisely the understanding I had attempted to cultivate throughout his musical education, often against family framework that prioritized measurable achievement over personal meaning or cultural connection. Not complete transformation, certainly, but substantive development from crisis that had initially appeared destructive rather than potentially transformative. As we concluded this unexpected interaction with tentative plans for continued conversation about both the composition and broader cultural exploration he had undertaken, I recognized genuine progress beyond what formal reconciliation efforts or negotiated arrangements might have produced. The violin's absence had created space for understanding that might never have developed through continued access without appreciation. Paradoxical gift emerging from painful separation and deliberate boundary setting. 3 weeks later, as January died, snow transformed Boston's landscape into momentary perfection, soon disrupted by urban necessity. Another email arrived from Jason with simple subject line: Juilliard program change confirmed. The message itself contained minimal explanation, but significant implication, dear Grandma. The Juilliard administration has approved my request to substitute Dvořák's violin concerto for my previously submitted program. Professor Levinson believes the technical challenges are manageable within available preparation time, though presentation may lack polish that longer familiarity would provide. Mom was concerned about strategic implications for admission prospects, but ultimately supported decision as reflection of artistic integrity. I've been learning about Dvořák's incorporation of Czech folk elements into classical structures, similar to what great-grandfather Karel apparently did with his violin designs according to family stories you've shared. Understanding these connections has changed how I approach interpretation beyond technical execution. Would you be willing to meet again before the audition? Not for coaching on the violin itself, but to share more about Czech musical traditions that might inform my understanding of the piece's cultural context. This matters regardless of whether the family violin becomes part of my development again. With appreciation for difficult lessons, Jason. The request, focused on cultural understanding rather than instrument access, reflected continuing evolution, beyond utilitarian approach that had characterized previous relationship with both musical education and family heritage. Not strategic positioning to regain valuable resource, but genuine engagement with legacy previously reduced to competitive advantage or financial asset. What had begun with boiling water and painful burns had transformed through months of separation and reflection into unexpected opportunity for genuine understanding across generations. The violin remained in my possession, protected from utilitarian reduction, while Jason developed appreciation necessary for its proper stewardship. Whether and when the instrument might return to his hands remained undetermined, but foundation for meaningful transmission beyond mere inheritance had been established through crisis that initially appeared destructive rather than potentially transformative. The path forward remained uncertain, with Catherine and Andrew still navigating. Adjustment to values framework that challenged fundamental assumptions about achievement, success, and meaningful development. Yet Jason's emerging understanding offered hope that cultural heritage might transmit across generations despite different contexts and priorities, not through imposition, but through genuine recognition of meaning beyond utility or acquisition. Juilliard audition date approached with remarkable swiftness, winter's frozen stillness giving way to tentative signs of early spring as February neared its conclusion. Following Jason's request, we had met several times to discuss Czech musical traditions and cultural context, informing Dvořák's compositions. These conversations unfolded without the family violin's physical presence, yet centered on its spiritual significance, the values, history, and artistic philosophy it represented beyond material form. Dvořák incorporated folk elements not as exotic ornaments, but as essential expressions of cultural identity, I explained during one particularly meaningful session at the Museum of Fine Arts Café that had become our regular meeting place. For composers living through political upheaval and cultural suppression, these musical choices represented resistance as much as artistic preference. Jason listened with uncharacteristic attentiveness, taking notes and asking questions that reflected genuine engagement rather than strategic information gathering. Was it similar for great-grandfather Karel? Was violin making a form of cultural preservation during political turmoil? Very much so, I confirmed, pleased by connection. He had independently recognized. Each instrument he created contained subtle design elements that referenced Czech traditions, government authorities were actively suppressing. The distinctive scroll pattern on our family violin incorporates folk motifs that would have been immediately recognizable to other Czech musicians but invisible to authorities monitoring cultural expression. These discussions expanded beyond musical technicalities to broader exploration of how artistic traditions embody values, preserve identity, and create continuity across generations and geographical displacement. Not abstract academic exercise, but living context for understanding both the Dvořák concerto Jason was preparing and the family violin's significance beyond its material qualities. Catherine and Andrew maintained careful distance from these conversations, neither interfering nor participating in developing relationship that seemed to transcend their carefully established family framework. Their ambivalence was understandable, recognizing positive development in Jason's maturity while remaining concerned about influences that challenged achievement-oriented worldview they had consistently cultivated. Jason seems quite invested in this cultural research, Catherine observed during brief phone conversation confirming transportation arrangements for the upcoming Juilliard audition. Her tone suggested mixture of approval regarding son's scholarly dedication and lingering concern about divergence from established priorities. Professor Levinson mentioned his interpretative approach to the Dvořák show's unusual maturity for someone his age. Understanding cultural context creates foundation for authentic expression beyond technical execution, I responded. Gentle explanation rather than critique of previous emphasis on measurable achievement. Musical interpretation becomes meaningful when connected to something beyond perfect performance. This perspective, prioritizing connection to cultural heritage over competitive positioning, remained foreign to Catherine's framework, despite months of parallel processing following our separation. Her response reflected characteristic tension between personal values and emerging recognition of alternative perspectives. While cultural appreciation certainly enriches artistic development, technical excellence remains essential foundation for professional advancement. Jason's Juilliard prospects still depend primarily on demonstrating superior capability relative to extremely qualified applicant pool. This framing, acknowledging cultural dimensions while maintaining primacy of competitive metrics, represented her persistent worldview rather than deliberate rejection of emerging understanding. Not opposition, but parallel track reflecting fundamentally different priorities that might complement rather than contradict each other if properly integrated. The most significant development in our family dynamic occurred 3 days before the Juilliard audition, when Jason requested meeting at my apartment rather than our usual museum cafe. The request itself represented meaningful evolution, acknowledgement of my separate residence as legitimate space rather than temporary arrangement awaiting inevitable return to family framework. Catherine expressed characteristic concern about this independent connection developing outside her direct observation, yet respected emerging boundaries with remarkable restraint compared to earlier interventionist tendencies. When Jason arrived that afternoon, his demeanor suggested purpose beyond casual conversation, determination beneath characteristic composure indicating prepared communication rather than spontaneous discussion. After declining offered tea with polite explanation about avoiding caffeine before important performances, he settled in my small living room with uncharacteristic directness. "I've been thinking about what happens after the audition," he began. Careful formality suggesting prepared statement rather than casual observation. Not just about conservatory decisions or next performance opportunities, but about our family and what we value across generations. This framing, prioritizing family relationships and intergenerational values over achievement metrics, indicated continuing evolution beyond utilitarian approach that had characterized previous interactions. Not performance for strategic advantage, but genuine engagement with fundamental questions underlying our original conflict. "The past few months have changed how I understand music and its purpose," he continued with remarkable clarity for someone his age. Before the incident with the water, I saw music primarily as achievement area where I could demonstrate measurable superiority. Technical perfection and competitive advancement were primary metrics for success. The assessment, acknowledging limited perspective with unusual self-awareness, demonstrated reflective capacity beyond what our previous interactions had suggested. Not strategic positioning, but genuine recognition of developmental limitations previously invisible within family's achievement-oriented framework. Working on the Dvořák without access to the family violin has forced different kind of growth, he observed with insight reflecting genuine rather than performative understanding. Instead of focusing on how superior instrument could enhance competitive advantage, I've had to explore cultural meaning and personal expression through less prestigious equipment. That limitation created opportunity I wouldn't have recognized otherwise. This perspective, finding value in constraints rather than viewing them merely as obstacles to achievement, suggested philosophical maturity rarely developed within consistently advantaged circumstances. The separation from both grandmother and valuable instrument had created unexpected space for growth beyond family's carefully managed development trajectory. This assessment, prioritizing interpretative understanding alongside technical facility, validated perspective I had attempted to cultivate throughout Jason's musical education, often against family framework that emphasized measurable achievement, over cultural connection or personal meaning. Not rejection of technical excellence, but recognition of its integration with deeper understanding beyond perfect execution. As reception concluded and Jason prepared for return journey to Boston, he approached with unexpected requests that transcended immediate audition circumstances or conservation decisions. "Would you join us for dinner tonight?" he asked with sincerity, suggesting genuine rather than obligatory inclusion. "There's something I'd like to discuss with everyone together." The invitation, extending beyond audition support to family reconnection, represented significant evolution in our relationship following months of separate processing and careful boundary maintenance. Catherine and Andrew's expressions suggested mixture of surprise and tentative acceptance, their characteristic control tendencies balanced against recognition of Jason's emerging maturity and independence. "We'd certainly welcome your company," Catherine confirmed with professional courtesy, masking whatever reservations she might harbor about unplanned family discussion beyond her direct management. The reservation at Carmichael's should accommodate additional guests without difficulty. The restaurant offered neutral territory for conversation that remained potentially challenging, despite months of separate reflection and gradual reconnection. As we settled around elegantly appointed table in private dining alcove arranged through Andrew's professional connections, conversation initially focused on audition assessment and faculty feedback, safe territory of shared interest despite different priorities regarding outcomes and evaluations. Only after main course had been served and preliminary discussion exhausted did Jason introduce substantive topic underlying his dinner invitation. With deliberate formality suggesting prepared statement rather than spontaneous observation, he addressed the fundamental issue that had separated our family despite months of parallel processing and tentative reconnection. "I've been thinking about the family violin and what should happen with it moving forward," he began, directness silencing conventional dinner conversation as Catherine set down her fork with careful precision and Andrew assumed listening posture reminiscent of professional negotiations. Not just about auditions or conservatory applications, but about what it represents across generations and how that legacy continues. This framing, prioritizing cultural significance over competitive considerations, reflected continuing evolution beyond utilitarian approach that had characterized earlier relationship with both the instrument and family heritage generally. Catherine's expression suggested lingering concern about direction this conversation might take, while Andrew maintained professional neutrality, pending additional information before determining response. "The violin represents different things to different generations of our family," Jason continued with remarkable clarity, considering ongoing tensions underlying superficial reconciliation. For great-great-grandfather Carol, it embodied cultural preservation during political suppression. For great-grandfather Anton, it provided connection to homeland during displacement and immigration. For Grandma, it represents artistic tradition and values beyond performance or acquisition. This articulation, recognizing multiple dimensions of significance beyond material value or competitive advantage, demonstrated understanding previously, absent from family's utilitarian approach to both the instrument specifically and heritage generally. Not strategic positioning, but genuine recognition of cultural meaning transcending achievement metrics or financial valuation. For me, it initially represented prestigious equipment that enhanced competitive advantage, he acknowledged with unusual self-awareness for 16-year-olds shaped by achievement-oriented upbringing. That limited perspective led directly to behavior that demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of its actual significance. The separation from both the violin and Grandma created necessary space for recognition that might never have developed otherwise. Catherine appeared momentarily disconcerted by public acknowledgement of behaviors family narrative had consistently minimized as unfortunate incident or accident rather than deliberate action requiring accountability and consequence. Andrew studied wine glass with uncharacteristic fascination, professional composure temporarily inadequate to emerging reality beyond carefully managed parameters. I've drafted proposal for how we might move forward, Jason continued, removing folder, containing document separate from audition materials or academic assignments. Not demand or expectation, but suggestion for arrangement that honors both the violin's significance and Grandma's rightful position as its current steward. The document he distributed contained not legal framework or property agreement, but thoughtful reflection titled Cultural Heritage and Family Responsibility. Unlike conventional proposals focused on practical arrangements or material distributions, this articulated philosophy regarding intergenerational transmission of values beyond physical objects or competitive advantages. The so-called violin represents material embodiment of values, traditions, and cultural identity that transcend any individual family member's temporary stewardship. While legal ownership frameworks might determine property rights in conventional sense, cultural heritage operates according to different principles based on demonstrated understanding and appropriate stewardship. Following my failure to demonstrate necessary appreciation for the violin's significance beyond its material qualities or competitive advantages, my grandmother appropriately removed it from environment that had reduced living heritage to prestigious equipment. This necessary boundary created opportunity for fundamental reconsideration of what musical legacy actually means beyond technical execution or achievement metrics. Moving forward requires arrangement that honors multiple dimensions of the violin's significance while ensuring its preservation as cultural heritage rather than mere property. This might include structured access based on demonstrated understanding rather than competitive requirements, shared stewardship arrangements acknowledging different generational perspectives, and formal documentation of family history and values the instrument embodies beyond material form. The proposal continued with specific suggestions regarding how Jason might gradually rebuild relationship with the family violin through demonstrated understanding rather than entitlement. Regular discussions about cultural heritage, formal documentation of family history connected to the instrument, and performance repertoire specifically honoring Czech musical traditions that had shaped its creation and purpose across generations. Most significantly, the document explicitly acknowledged my legitimate authority as current steward while proposing graduated access based on demonstrated appreciation rather than competitive requirements or achievement metrics. Final determination regarding appropriate timeline and circumstances for renewed access rightfully belongs to my grandmother as current steward. This proposal represents neither expectation nor demand, but suggestion for arrangement, honoring both the violin's cultural significance and appropriate accountability for previous failure to appreciate its meaning beyond material qualities. Whether I eventually play the family violin again remains appropriately uncertain, given demonstrated limitations in my previous understanding. What matters more than physical possession is developing relationship with heritage. It represents beyond technical facility or competitive advantage. The temporary separation has revealed connection between artistic integrity and personal character that might otherwise have remained invisible within framework, focused primarily on achievement. As Catherine and Andrew reviewed this remarkable document, their expressions suggested complex mixture of surprise regarding its philosophical sophistication, pride in Jason's evident maturity, and lingering reservation about arrangements transcending conventional property frameworks or achievement metrics that had consistently guided family decisions. Not rejection, certainly, but recalibration requiring adjustment beyond established patterns of evaluation and management. This represents thoughtful approach to complex situation, Andrew acknowledged with professional assessment, balanced against parental pride in son's evident development. The emphasis on demonstrated understanding rather than entitlement shows maturity beyond conventional expectations for someone Jason's age. Catherine's response reflected characteristic tension between recognition of son's growth and persistent concern about practical implications beyond philosophical reconsideration. While cultural appreciation certainly enriches artistic development, conservatory applications and professional advancement still require regular access to appropriate equipment for optimal preparation and performance. This framing, acknowledging cultural dimensions while maintaining primacy of achievement considerations, represented her persistent worldview rather than deliberate opposition to emerging understanding. Not rejection, but parallel track reflecting fundamentally different priorities that might complement rather than contradict each other if properly integrated. Throughout this unexpected conversation, I had maintained deliberate silence, allowing family dynamic to unfold without intervention that might distort authentic processing or suggest predetermined outcome. Jason's remarkable proposal had emerged without guidance or direction from any perspective beyond his own developing understanding, making its authenticity particularly meaningful against background of carefully managed development that had characterized his upbringing. "What do you think, Grandma?" he finally asked directly, genuine interest rather than strategic calculation guiding question after family had reviewed and discussed his proposal. "Does this approach make sense given everything that's happened?" The directness, seeking actual perspective rather than predetermined response, demonstrated respect transcending utilitarian approach that had characterized many previous interactions. Not performance for approval, but genuine engagement with complex questions of cultural transmission, artistic development, and intergenerational responsibility. "Your proposal shows remarkable understanding of what heritage actually means beyond material possession or competitive advantage," I responded honestly, genuine assessment rather than obligatory encouragement guiding response to his evident growth. The recognition that cultural transmission requires demonstrated appreciation rather than entitlement represents exactly the kind of understanding I hoped might eventually develop through our difficult separation. As conversation continued through dessert and coffee, unexpected consensus emerged regarding fundamental principle underlying Jason's proposal: that cultural heritage represented something beyond conventional property frameworks or achievement metrics, requiring demonstrated understanding rather than utilitarian approach focused primarily on competitive advantage or financial valuation. The specific arrangements remained appropriately unresolved, pending continued demonstration of understanding, through actions rather than intentions. No immediate decision regarding the violin's physical location or access parameters, but agreement about processes through which meaningful transmission might eventually occur beyond mere inheritance or acquisition. 3 weeks later, as early spring sunshine gradually warmed Boston's chilled landscape, I received Juilliard's admission letter congratulating Jason on acceptance into their prestigious program, recognition of both technical capability and interpretative maturity, demonstrated through repertoire choice honoring cultural heritage beyond conventional performance requirements. The accompanying faculty assessment noted particular appreciation for unusual cultural understanding, informing technical execution with emotional maturity rarely observed in applicants this age. When Jason called to share this significant achievement, his response revealed continuing evolution beyond utilitarian approach that had previously characterized his relationship with music and achievement generally. "The acceptance matters less than what I've learned through this entire process," he observed with remarkable perspective for 16-year-old shaped by achievement-oriented upbringing. Understanding cultural heritage and personal responsibility creates foundation that transcends any particular institution or performance opportunity. This perspective, prioritizing understanding over achievement, represented fundamental shift from framework that had consistently shaped his development. Through carefully managed progression focused primarily on measurable outcomes and competitive positioning, not rejection of excellence, but recognition of its integration with deeper meaning beyond technical facility or institutional validation. The most significant development in our family's journey occurred 2 months later during quiet ceremony. Neither planned nor announced, but emerging organically from Jason's continued demonstration of understanding beyond initial proposal or philosophical articulation. Following particularly meaningful conversation about Czech musical traditions and their expression through both instrument construction and performance practices, I made decision that felt appropriate recognition of genuine, rather than strategic, development. "I believe the family violin is ready for limited reintroduction to your development," I suggested carefully, emphasizing continued stewardship rather than complete transfer that might undermine ongoing process of understanding and appreciation. Not permanent return, but structured access that honors both your growing appreciation for its significance and continuing accountability for appropriate respect. The arrangement we established represented neither victory nor surrender, but thoughtful integration of different perspectives regarding cultural transmission and artistic development. The violin would remain primarily in my possession with scheduled access for specific purposes related to cultural understanding rather than competitive requirements. Performances honoring Czech musical traditions, recording project documenting, family heritage through music, and regular sessions exploring connection between instrumental characteristics and cultural expression beyond technical facility. Catherine and Andrew accepted this arrangement with surprising accommodation, considering their persistent emphasis on achievement metrics and competitive positioning. Not complete recalibration of fundamental values, but recognition of complementary rather than contradictory relationship between cultural appreciation and artistic excellence when properly integrated through meaningful understanding beyond utilitarian approach. The structured access actually aligns with developing performance maturity, Catherine observed with characteristic attention to practical implications, alongside emerging recognition of cultural dimensions previously undervalued in families' approach. Regular transition between instruments develops adaptability beneficial for professional versatility beyond any specific equipment advantages. This framing, finding practical benefit within cultural arrangement, represented her continuing perspective rather than fundamental transformation, yet acknowledged legitimate value in approach previously dismissed as merely sentimental or impractical. Not conversion, but integration. Recognizing complementary rather than contradictory relationship between different generational priorities when approached with mutual respect rather than hierarchical evaluation. As Jason prepared for transition to Juilliard's pre-college program that fall, our family relationship continued evolving toward deeper integration of different perspectives regarding cultural heritage, artistic development, and intergenerational responsibility. Not perfect resolution eliminating all tension between competing priorities, but meaningful accommodation, recognizing legitimate value in approaches previously positioned as fundamentally opposed rather than potentially complementary. The violin itself remained powerful symbol beyond its material form. representing not just exceptional craftsmanship or prestigious equipment, but living embodiment of values, traditions, and cultural identity, transcending any individual stewardship or temporary possession. Its journey across generations and continents continued through structured transmission, based on demonstrated understanding rather than entitlement, ensuring heritage remained living tradition rather than merely preserved artifact or strategic advantage. Great-great-grandfather Carol created this instrument to preserve cultural expression when external circumstances threatened traditional values and artistic practices, Jason observed during particularly meaningful session exploring. Connection between the violin's construction and Czech musical traditions it had been designed to embody. Its purpose transcended immediate circumstances to establish connection across generations that might otherwise have been lost through political suppression or cultural displacement. This understanding, recognizing cultural dimensions beyond technical characteristics or material valuation, represented precisely the perspective I had attempted to communicate throughout his musical education, often against family framework that prioritized measurable achievement over cultural connection, or personal meaning, not rejection of excellence, but recognition of its integration with deeper purpose beyond technical facility or competitive positioning. My grandson had thrown boiling water that left physical scars still visible on my arm and emotional wounds, that required substantial healing through deliberate separation and careful boundary setting. His parents had excused this behavior through minimization that prioritized achievement continuity over accountability and genuine understanding. I had left this situation, taking valuable violin that represented cultural heritage requiring protection from utilitarian reduction to prestigious equipment or competitive advantage. What emerged through this painful separation wasn't merely restored property arrangement or superficial reconciliation, but fundamental reconsideration of what legacy actually means beyond material possession or technical transmission. The crisis that initially appeared destructive had created unexpected opportunity for understanding that might never have developed through comfortable continuation or convenient compromise. The scars remained visible, physical reminder on my arm, and emotional memories not entirely healed through subsequent understanding or philosophical integration. Yet these imperfect resolutions represented reality of cultural transmission across generations with different contexts, priorities, and perspectives. Not seamless continuity, but meaningful evolution, preserving essential values while adapting expression to changing circumstances and developing understanding. 6 months after our carefully structured arrangement began, during family gathering, celebrating both Jason's development at Juilliard and Catherine's professional advancement within her law firm, my grandson surprised everyone with performance that transcended both technical execution and cultural appreciation previously discussed, in abstract terms. Using the family violin within established parameters of our agreement, he presented original composition titled simply Heritage, that incorporated both Czech musical traditions and contemporary classical language in seamless integration, representing genuine rather than performative understanding. As final notes faded into appreciative silence, I recognized that valuable instrument I had removed from harmful environment had found its way home, not to physical location or specific individual, but to genuine understanding, transcending utilitarian approach that had previously limited its significance to prestigious equipment or competitive advantage. The legacy continued not through perfect resolution or complete transformation, but through meaningful evolution, preserving essential connection while accommodating necessary change. My grandson had thrown boiling water that created painful separation. His parents had excused behavior that required boundary rather than accommodation. I had left with valuable violin requiring protection beyond material worth. Through this difficult journey, something more valuable than any physical instrument had been preserved, understanding that cultural heritage transcends possession, that legacy continues through demonstrated appreciation rather than entitlement. That meaningful transmission requires integration of different perspectives rather than hierarchical evaluation of whose values should prevail. The scars remained, yet healing had occurred beyond mere restoration to previous arrangements. Not perfect resolution, but meaningful evolution, honoring essential values while adapting expression to changing circumstances and developing understanding. The violin's journey continued across generations and circumstances, its voice carrying stories that transcended any temporary stewardship or individual possession. Living legacy rather than preserved artifact, meaningful connection rather than prestigious possession. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.